definition of success, Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, that's not what American, good old USA medicine is all about.
That's right. That's right.
It's time, quality time spent with that doctor, and maybe no prescriptions. And I yield back.
Sir, precisely, and thank you, precisely the point that I'm agreeing on with you, and that I think we all have driven to. Philosophically, we need to have solutions that empower our doctors and our patients and our providers to do all of them, to have the best and to do the best. And consumer-based solutions are possible. Our Doctors Caucus is working very hard on providing those ideas. Real liability reform has to be part of this. We cannot possibly continue as we have been. That was a glaring omission from the ACA. But in addition, we need to recognize, appreciate, and act upon the knowledge that our medical care can cost less. We do need to pay attention to cost, but we need to empower our patients and our doctors and our providers to use their best judgment, not empower something like the Independent Payment Advisory Board to make those decisions for us. That's a very dangerous thing and something that Americans will find very distressing and disturbing, and that is the inevitable result of the ACA, is that you can trace it out, but we will end up having less choice. The government will make decisions for us. They will be decisions we don't like. We need our consumers and our providers to be able to make those decisions. And I yield back. Thank you, Doctor.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentlewoman from New York, and I appreciate her time. If my clock watching is accurate, I think we may have 8 to 10 minutes left, and I will try to conclude. But I'd like to see if my colleagues would like to weigh in with additional comments. We do have time. If any of those that are still on the floor would like to bring some more enlightenment into this subject. Yes, I'll be glad to yield to a representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we've come to the point now where we do need to discuss, you know, Obamacare is not the answer. And we've all discussed this over and over again. I would say that it's probably a good reason that I was elected, because I ran on repealing it. That and cutting taxes and cutting spending, and it all ties in together. But you know, those of us who are in health care, we've been aware of the need for reform for quite some time. I think any of us can say that we've seen the costs increase. We've seen the cost of health care insurance increase. And yet we've all felt that our hands were tied. We didn't know how to address it. The bureaucratic system, as my colleagues have pointed out, just dealing with billing and trying to get the care for patients alone can just take over your office. And we've seen these things. We know that there are problems that exist, but we all agree that it needs to be a patient-centered, doctor-nurse-patient relationship that we have to be putting forward. And it has to be in the private sector. And there are ways to do this. There is a role for government in it, especially when we're talking about Medicare, Medicaid, and those who are unfortunate, we want everyone to have health care. But there are ways that we can address it. And it's not a health care crisis, it's a crisis of culture. We have to change the culture that we're dealing with. We want everyone to have affordable health care, and there are simple solutions we can put in place to do that. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina yields back to me, and I'm so glad that I called on her, that she brought up this point, colleagues, because what Renee Elmas just said is absolutely the truth, that we're not on this side of the aisle, and those Democrats who agree with us, we're not opposed to reform in the health insurance industry, to eliminating abusive practices such as canceling policies after the fact or denying children with pre-existing conditions. And that's exactly what the gentlewoman from North Carolina was referencing. And, the pledge to repeal Obamacare is because, in our humble opinion, it's too bad to fix. That doesn't mean that when we replace it, and we may have to do it piece by piece, bit by bit, that we don't incorporate some of the things in there that most people would agree are good, like allowing youngsters, young adults, Mr. Speaker, to stay on their health insurance policy of their parents till they're 26 years old. With this economy and the destruction of jobs because of bailouts and stimulus, trillions of dollars that don't work, unfortunately, our young college graduates have no job to go to. Otherwise, they'd have health insurance from their place of work. So they darn well need to stay on their parents' policy until they're 26 and maybe until they're 36 if we don't get our act together and quit spending and get this economy going. Let me yield quickly because I realize that we've got a member who just came and was with us earlier and had an engagement and had to be there, so he has returned. Dr. Phil Rowe, my OB/GYN colleague from Tennessee, and I yield to Dr. Rowe.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and when I came, as we all did, I guess doctors, physicians tend to look at a problem. When a patient comes in, the first thing we ask them, Dr. Gingrey, is, why are you here today? A fairly obvious question. It's called the chief complaint. When I came to Washington, D.C., I asked the same thing about the American healthcare system. I said, what is the problem with the American healthcare system? And I thought there were probably three. Number one, it was too expensive. The costs of health care have skyrocketed way above inflation, so it's way too expensive to come see the doctor, go to the hospital. The second issue I saw you just brought up was there was a segment of our population that didn't have access to affordable health insurance coverage. Now, these are not the very poor who had access in our state to TennCare or in other states to Medicaid, but these are folks who are out working. Maybe they're a carpenter and their wife stays at home, or maybe they have a job, a small business, where they can't afford it. So there's that segment that didn't have it. And lastly, there's a liability crisis in America. And our friends on the other side, or our trial lawyer friends, can tend to say that that's not the case. But let me give you a personal example. When I started my medical practice, and probably about the same time you and I did, Dr. Gingrey, it cost $360. That was the first baby I delivered in 1977 that I got paid for, was out of the Army and out of my training, $360. And my first year's salary was $32,000. That's what I made my first year in practice. Delivered 260 babies that year, a lot of babies. And the next year I was up to about $60,000 a year. My malpractice was $4,000 a year. When I came to Congress 2 years ago, the malpractice in Tennessee for an obstetrician was $74,000. And there's no value that we get, that patients get from that. And we'll go into that when we have another hour. But the thing about the Obamacare plan that bothered me was that it did nothing to bend the cost curve. If you looked at this, and if you look at plans that have been out there in the past, Medicare, for instance, came on board in 1965 as a $3 billion program, $3 billion in 1965. The estimators, there was no Congressional Budget Office then, or folks that make these estimates, but the government estimators at that time said in 25 years this will be a $15 billion program. The actual number was over $100 billion, and today it's over $500 billion. In Tennessee, we noticed we had the same problem 20 years ago. I've been through all of this before. Unfortunately, no one here chose to listen to us in our doctors' caucus. We said we had lack of access and we had prices rising back in the 90s, the early 90s. Exactly the same debate that we're having today, except it's more severe today than it was. We spent $2.6 billion on TennCare in 1993. 2004, 2005, just 10 budget years later, it was up to $8.5 billion. The costs had tripled. So when you see these cost estimates, and remember that the same CBO, and these are good folks, I'm not pointing a finger at them. It's very hard to do what they do. They're given a set of data, they crunch the numbers, and they hand them to us. They only missed this year's budget deficit by $400 billion in 1 year. So I'm to stand here and believe, looking at these other examples I've just given you, that this is going to be budget neutral in 10 years. There's no way that it will be. I know we have a lot to discuss, and I'm sorry I'm a little late. I had some folks from the great University of Tennessee in my office to go see, but I look forward to continuing this discussion, and I yield back my time.
Well, Dr. Rowe, you need to be with those folks from Tennessee, and we just appreciate you getting over here on the floor and being with us. I know the time is rapidly coming to a close, but Mr. Speaker, I guess the last slide basically says it all, cuts right to the chase. Obamacare steals Americans' liberty. Our forefathers intended certain basic rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, to be inalienable. That means can't be taken away from you, and consider them self-evident and universal. Obamacare is the boss. It lets the boss steal liberty from every American by forcing them to buy health insurance whether they want it or need it or not. We can encourage them to have it and try to make it possible and affordable, but to force them to do it, the next thing we know, everybody will be eating broccoli by government edict because it's healthy. It's healthy food. They're going to have a hard time getting me, Mr. Speaker, to eat broccoli. But I'm telling you, the judge in Florida, Judge Vinson, and the judge in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Judge Hudson, they got it right. We need expedited processing of those suits so the Supreme Court will tell the American people this is unconstitutional and will not stand. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Today, March 1st, marks the 50th anniversary of the United States Peace Corps. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy, together with Sergeant Shriver, established the most remarkable, long-lasting, and incredibly successful United States Peace Corps. On the announcement of the establishment of the Peace Corps, countries around the world clamored to have Americans of all ages come to their country and assist in the economic development of those countries. To date, over 200,000 Americans have followed that call to service and have served in over 130 countries. Today, some 77 countries have Peace Corps volunteers, and another 20 countries request the presence of Peace Corps volunteers. My wife Patty and I are proud returned Peace Corps volunteers. Joining me today to celebrate this 50th anniversary are two other returned Peace Corps volunteers, and together with Sam Farr, who unfortunately cannot join us this evening, comprise the 4 members of Congress who are returned Peace Corps volunteers. I'd like to call upon my colleague from California, Mike Honda, to join us here and to express his own experiences and his work here in Congress and how it may have reflected, how his Peace Corps experiences may have reflected upon his work. Mike, if you'll join us.
Thank you, John, and I would have made this space easier after Peace Corps than right now. As a returned Peace Corps volunteer, I rise to recognize the work of Peace Corps as its 50th anniversary. And the Peace Corps has played an instrumental role in establishing prosperous foreign relations while fostering cross-cultural understandings. Countries from all over the globe celebrate contributions of the Peace Corps and look forward with anticipation to its continued growth. I was in Ethiopia a couple years ago representing the Ethiopian caucus here, and I traveled extensively through Ethiopia during the 8 days I was there. Ran across some folks in the upper part of Ethiopia, and we talked about Peace Corps, and immediately a lot of the young people there brightened up and said, "Did you know Garamendi?" And it was at that moment I remember that our colleague Garamendi had served in Ethiopia. But what struck me most was the impact, the long-term impact and memories that people that we have touched when they were youth stayed with them, and the impact and the influence that we've had with young people in the different countries had stayed with them, and they had become leaders in their own right in the countries that we served in. The same happened in El Salvador. I'm sure the same happened in Somalia, where our other colleagues had served their time. Peace Corps it provides a unique opportunity for volunteers to help some of the most impoverished people in the world, work that changes their global perspectives. I had met another person at Stanford University. He was a visiting scholar. He was not much more than 5'1", articulate in English and Spanish, and he said that he was an aberration of statistical probability. In saying that, he meant that he was a young boy in the mountains of Peru, and it was Peace Corps volunteer that had touched his life, that allowed him to learn more about himself and his country, that pushed him to learn English. And through the Peace Corps volunteer, he was able to go to school. His name was Alejandro Toledo. He became president of Peru. And now he's a visiting scholar. And now he's also looking at running again, perhaps serving his country. But not only serving his country, he serves all people of this country, of this world, by the fact that he was able to express the idea that he was probably an aberration of statistical probability, and that he has attained a position in the global stage, a leadership position, because of Peace Corps volunteer. This story is replicated over and over again with over the 195,000 volunteers that have served. I just want to pay special attention to Sergeant Shriver, the person who took the selfless commitment and visionary leadership in creating a pioneering organization that provided opportunities for young people and providing them opportunities to grow in themselves. Filling Shriver's shoes will always be difficult. And President Clinton was right when he said, "Never has America had a stronger warrior for peace and against poverty than Sergeant Shriver." And Shriver himself said it best when he said, "The Peace Corps represents some, if not all, of the best virtues of this society. It stands for everything that America has ever stood for. It stands for everything we believe in and hope to achieve in this world." And so I want to thank my colleague for putting this together. I want to thank my friend, Mr. Petri, for his friendship on the other side of the aisle. And we say the other side of the aisle, but I think that the aisle does not exist with our relationships and our commonality in the Peace Corps. Peace Corps allowed me to grow up. Peace Corps allowed me to believe in myself. Peace Corps was responsible for me being here today, to be able to speak fervently and hopefully convincingly, to encourage other young people that service to this country through the Peace Corps are 2 years that you'll never, never, ever regret, and never would ever exchange for 10 years of regular life in this country. And I thank you.
Congressman Mike Honda, thank you so very, very much. Let me now turn to our colleague on the Republican side, Tom Petri, who also served. And Tom, if you can share some of your experiences with us.
Yeah, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to join with my colleagues in recognizing the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Peace Corps. It was my pleasure some 25 years ago to work with the fellow whose picture is up by the podium, Sergeant Shriver, on some of the arrangements for the 25th anniversary of the Peace Corps, and they had a gala reunion and program at the Kennedy Center with such luminaries at that time as Harry Belafonte and many others. It was a memorable occasion. Sergeant Shriver, of course, was a great leader in many different areas, and he didn't really much like, though, and I met him in a reception line a while back, and said, so great to meet Arnold Schwarzenegger's father-in-law. And he didn't really want to be known as Arnold Schwarzenegger's father-in-law. He wanted to be known and is known as the first and most dynamic director of the Peace Corps, and for many other, working with Mrs. Shriver on Special Olympics and a variety of other good works that he did with his life. We all have our Peace Corps experiences. I had the opportunity to serve in the neighboring country to Ethiopia, Somalia. Troubled place now. It's a great experience, though. And people ask about the Peace Corps, and I always say that one of the things you have to remember about the Peace Corps is that you get a lot more out of it than you really give. You are serving other people, but you're learning about another culture, and at the same time you're learning about your own country and your own experience because of the points of contrast. And what a wonderful thing it is that America has now a large number, tens of thousands of people who have served in the Peace Corps and who've returned and now are working in every walk of life, working in international organizations, working in business organizations, knowing different cultures, knowing different languages, and thereby providing a dimension to our own national life that we would otherwise not have if we did not have people who had the experience of serving in the Peace Corps. So for a whole variety, and one other thing, I still can remember the quizzical but interested reaction that so many people in Somalia, or I'm sure anywhere in the world, who are you? Why are you doing? Explain that to me again. And how the spirit was kind of catching. And they would participate in all kinds of little volunteer activities and things that they hadn't necessarily thought of doing themselves. One thing when I was in, and of course, the Peace Corps volunteers are not representatives of the American government. They are representatives of the American people. And that was always emphasized very, very strongly to all of us as part of our Peace Corps training, and the way we're living among the people, not behind these diplomatic bunkers that we sometimes see in this world today, and experiencing life in the country in which you're serving. One thing, just as an example, that Peace Corps volunteers, of course, do their assignments, but they're also people, and they do volunteer work of one kind and another. When I was in one of the big hits, when I was in Mogadishu in the Peace Corps, with two other people who were Peace Corps lawyers at that time, about 50, 60 people who were teachers, and some community health workers and community school construction workers. People would come to Mogadishu for a little couple of days off of vacation time when school was down, that kind of thing. And 5 or 6 of them got together and started playing some American young people music. And the next thing you know, they were invited to a restaurant in Mogadishu, and crowds of hundreds of people gathered, and it was the sensation of the town for a couple weeks. Of course, they couldn't be paid for doing this sort of thing, but they might have got a couple free meals from the restaurant and that kind of thing. And what a wonderful sort of natural way of building bridges. The people in this country had never really seen something like this. They weren't on the tour for any of these international shows, and they just thought it was the most wonderful thing to see live music played by American Peace Corps volunteers, and that was the face of America that they were presenting in this country, and it was one that I think served our nation very well. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to participate in this special order that you've organized to mark the 50th anniversary of the United States.
Tom, thank you so very much for your experiences. Now, what year were you in Somalia?
I was in Somalia in 66, 67.
Those were the same years that Patty and I were in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And we served in the far western part of Ethiopia in a very small town.
We were there during the peaceful years between the two countries. Peace Corps had been in Somalia and then had been pulled out because war erupted between Ethiopia and Somalia. The people on the Horn of Africa have very close and great respect for each other, but also strong rivalry, and it's a very interesting thing to learn about.
Well, that's exactly the case, and it's not unusual to find wars going on, but as Mike Honda was talking about, the president of Peru, who started his climb up the economic and educational ladder as a result of his experience with a Peace Corps teacher in Peru. The same thing happens in the countries in which you and I and other Peace Corps volunteers serve. I recall in 1990, 99, 2000, when the war broke out between Ethiopia and Eritrea, a group of us became interlocutors trying to figure out how to get these two countries to settle up. And because we were able to stand on the shoulders of so many Peace Corps volunteers that had served in those countries, we were able to meet with the President of Eritrea and the Prime Minister of Ethiopia in two separate meetings and just talk to them about peace, about why they were fighting, why this war was going on. It had killed nearly 100,000 soldiers at that point. And it turned out that they were willing to talk to us. The reason was that in their high schools, they were taught by Peace Corps volunteers, and they had this trust. They knew we didn't represent the American government. They knew that we were there searching for peace, as we had when we were volunteers. It turned out that that conversation, or those conversations, led to the essence of the settlement of that war, the peace treaty. And I'll never forget a day when actually a gentleman who's here in the gallery at the moment, Chick Dombach, was one of our team, and another fellow who was Mike McCaskey, who was then the president of the Chicago Bears. And he was part of our team. And we sat down with the foreign minister of Ethiopia. And we were talking about where we served in the Peace Corps, and Mike was saying he served in the northern part of the country. And the foreign minister said, "What school?" And Mike described the school. It turned out that Mike was the teacher for the foreign minister, and immediately there was a connection. And that connection then led to the meeting that we had with Mellis and the conversation that ultimately led to a peace treaty. Our role was in it, but the Union of the Africa Union carried on. Those are the relationships that count. We never know when they're going to materialize. It's quite possible that the people that you taught may one day be the leaders in Somalia once again. And these are the foundations upon which the Peace Corps reads. Thank you so very much for joining us. I know that you have another appointment that you need to get to, but the experience of a Peace Corps, and my wife would, when she was at as the Associate Director of the Peace Corps, would often say that a Peace Corps volunteer leaves to search for peace and returns, and throughout one's life continues that process. And our work here in Congress is part of that. Thank you so very much for your service and joining us this evening.
Thank you for organizing
Thank you very much.
This occasion.
Thank you. The interest in the Peace Corps is not just shared by those of us who are returned volunteers. It's also served, and the interest is found by others. I'd like to invite here to the well a colleague of mine from California, Congresswoman Lois Capps, who represents the Santa Barbara area up into Santa Maria. Would you care to join us? Thank you so very much for doing so.
I'll thank my colleague, Mr. Garamendi, for inviting me to join him here and for bringing the likeness of Sergeant Shriver, the first director, so that I could stand next to him and pay tribute to him as I am speaking about the importance of the Peace Corps as I have experienced it. This is such an important anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Peace Corps. Actually, this day, apparently, that's what you mentioned in your remarks, Mr. Garamendi, and that you were joined by two members of Congress who probably were influenced to become members of Congress by, in fact, one, Mr. Petri just spoke, and he said it's because, or Mr. Honda did, and said it's because of his experiences in the Peace Corps, he could say, honestly, that that's why he's now serving in Congress. And I've heard other our colleagues say that as well, and both Mr. Honda and Mr. Petri speak eloquently, as you do, Mr. Garamendi, about the effect of this experience on you. And I've seen it firsthand from friends of mine. I don't think it's possible to say enough positive about this wonderful organization. So having a special order this afternoon, this evening, is an opportunity for us all to come together and celebrate the commitment of the United States Congress to communities around the world as they experience it through volunteerism, through ordinary citizens of this country who volunteer to share in the life and experience of a culture different from their own. As the Peace Corps celebrates its 50th anniversary, it's clear that this work that our citizens and volunteers have done and today is never more important than we see it today, and also more relevant to what's going on in the world today. I am very proud to represent a congressional district, the 23rd in California, with a very active returned Peace Corps volunteer community. The Alumni Association numbers well over 150 members, and they're active in our community. And I think that I know firsthand also, knowing several of them, many of them, that the community has been strengthened because of their experiences in Peace Corps, and they readily testify to that. And at the University of California in Santa Barbara, my hometown, this campus consistently ranks toward the top of U.S. colleges and universities for volunteer recruitment among its young graduates. When I have the opportunity to meet with folks from the Peace Corps Administrative Office, the first thing they always mention when they find out where I'm from is the high concentration of former and future volunteers from my congressional district. And so I know that on the south and central coast of California, with these alumni living and working among us, the importance of service, of community, of open-mindedness, of the values that Peace Corps holds dear, these have influenced the way our civic life is conducted in our country as these returned Peace Corps volunteers bring their experiences in their service abroad back to their home communities and places of business. It's a win-win on both sides of whatever body it is that separates us from our countries around the world. There's an institute in my campus that I'll reference. It's named for my husband, but it's called the CAPS Center for the Study of Faith, Ethics, and Public Policy. And they sponsored an event. In fact, they had a series of events this past fall celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps. And at that occasion, one of those occasions, it was a privilege to welcome Aaron Williams, who is the Peace Corps, National Peace Corps Director, to Santa Barbara. And in doing so, to pay tribute to the Peace Corps, but also we invited, the CAP Center invited three former Peace Corps volunteers to honor their service, but also to invite them to form a panel discussion so the rest of us could listen and respond and have questions about their own experiences. One of them was Sarah Shays, who's a former NPR National Public Radio correspondent. She's a prominent author and founder of the Argand Cooperative in Kandahar, Afghanistan. She spoke of her early in the formation of Peace Corps, her experiences there. She served in Morocco from 1984 to 1986. Also present to be recognized and also to participate in the discussion was Gordon Radley. He's the former president of Lucasfilms, and he served in Malawi from 1968 to 1970, and then again in Western Samoa in 1979 and 1980. The third person who spoke, I just acknowledge these people because they're examples of community leaders in the country who were influenced so tremendously by their experience in Peace Corps. One whom I know well because he's a constituent of ours in the congressional district, but also with his service is Thomas Teig. He is the president and CEO of a very influential organization called Direct Relief International, which provides emergency services, disaster aid to countries around the world. Its headquarters in Santa Barbara. And before Tom came to this position, he served as the Peace Corps Associate General Counsel and was the Chief of Staff and COO of the Peace Corps. And he himself served in Thailand from 1986 to 1988. So their stories, and I mention these three because now the Library of Congress is collecting stories from previous volunteers, and I think it's a great idea that the anecdotes and vignettes that Peace Corps volunteers remember so poignantly from their time of service can be woven into the Library of Congress archives and there for permanent record. You know, some of us in Congress, Mr. Garamendi, are old enough to remember the passion and enthusiasm from these 50 years ago when President Kennedy announced the creation of the Corps. The idea that Americans from all different backgrounds and walks of life would have an opportunity to work for and to learn from other cultures. You know, in that time, that was a fairly radical concept. But I marvel, don't you, at how far we have come. Since 1961, when the first volunteers went abroad, nearly 200,000 volunteers have served in 139 countries around the world. These are talented and selfless Americans who've made lasting contributions in agriculture, in business development, in sustainable infrastructure, in education, in health, in combating HIV and AIDS, in working to protect the environment around the world. Collectively, each volunteer's work represents a legacy of service that has become such a significant part of America's history and the positive image that we have abroad. I know that Mr. Farr is going to speak probably after me, and he's just joined the group, and he and I are part of an organization here in Congress which has some connections to the Peace Corps. And last week, it's called the House Democracy Partnership. And last week, we traveled actually literally around the world. And one of the places we were, one of our partner countries whose parliament we work with closely is the country of Indonesia. And for many years, the Peace Corps was not there. And now just this past year, volunteers have been welcomed back. And we had the chance to meet these active volunteers as we have met during other visits to other countries with our work in the House Democracy Partnership. Some of the countries are Malawi and Indonesia, and we've taken gifts. Sometimes, occasionally, we'll have a constituent serving there, so a family will ask us to bring some item that this person has wanted. But when we, and it was because of Mr. Farr's insistence that we invite 4 of the current volunteers. They've just come back, the presence of Peace Corps in the country. And I know, Mr. Farr, I hope you'll expand upon this. The 4 had dinner with us who were visiting. Here we were in Surabaya, coastal community in a large city, actually, in Indonesia. And these 4 young people who are teaching English as a second language in the high schools in the region came and shared some of their stories with us. It moved me then, as it has over the years as I've heard these stories, and to see these young faces. Not all Peace Corps volunteers are young, I know that, but these were young people who just were caught with zeal and enthusiasm with what they were doing. So, you know, during times of both war and peace, our volunteers through Peace Corps have exemplified some of the best qualities that this country has to offer the world: generosity, tolerance, hard work, ingenuity, friendship, and compassion. They have exhibited critical attention to detail and an unwavering commitment to sustainable development. These are talented people who really are a beacon of the goodwill that we want our country to stand for. So I'm offering tonight, and I'm standing right next to the likeness of Sergeant Shriver, as I offer my sincerest congratulations to the Peace Corps on a 50th anniversary that we all joined in celebration. I want to take the opportunity to encourage anyone who's thinking about it to serve, either abroad or find a way in one's own community to serve with this kind of volunteerism. And I appreciate the leadership you've shown, Mr. Garamendi, in calling us together. I want to thank you and my colleagues in Congress who add so much to your service as colleagues of mine by this history that you share. You can add this to the kind of Peace Corps volunteerism that you did when you were younger, and it is a spirit that I know has never left you. So I got a signal from Mr. Garamendi, and it is really a tribute because Mr. Farr is a dear friend, but also my neighboring congressional district representative, and he never misses an opportunity, whether he's at home or abroad, to bring up the topic of serving in the Peace Corps. And how fitting this evening, Mr. Farr, that you are here to add your words to and your stories to this celebration. So I'm going to yield the floor, if it's okay with Mr. Garamendi, right directly to you.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Lois Capps. I'm so fond of you and the service you give and your wonderful district, the Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo County coastlines. Yes, I was with Congressman Capps last week when we hosted in Surabaya a dinner with Peace Corps volunteers, and what struck me is, one, some of their assignments were much tougher than the one I had in Abadio in Medellin, Colombia back in the 60s. The women live with Muslim families because Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. They teach in schools. Very interesting how and essentially progressive even those Muslim schools were, allowing the American women not to have to be covered and to essentially be themselves and represent this country, and how fond the students are of their teachers and the faculty of the teachers. So Peace Corps was there, and it's interesting that we pay tribute on the 50th anniversary that there's no age limit to joining the Peace Corps. We're in I think 77 countries now. We're about half our full size. We once were 15,000 volunteers. We're down to 7,000, growing. Congressman Garamendi and myself and others have been working to try to increase the Peace Corps budget because it's the only thing that's standing in way between more volunteers being in overseas. There's 20 countries that want Peace Corps. There's 20,000 people that apply to the Peace Corps, and there's only every year about half of 7,000, so about 3,500 jobs available. So only 1 in 3 or 4 ever can get a chance to get accepted. That's not fair, and we need to double the size of the Peace Corps. And lastly, on that point, is that it only costs 1/3, 1/6 the amount of to send a soldier to, or let me get my figures right here. I think it's for every soldier we sent to Afghanistan, we could send 12 Peace Corps volunteers abroad. So we really get a good bang for our buck. And why I rise tonight and try to be quick before we give it back to Mr. Garamendi is to, on the behalf of all 4 of us who are returned Peace Corps volunteers now serving in Congress, we circulated a letter asking the President of the United States to issue a proclamation on honoring the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps. It was signed by 136 members of Congress, and today, on the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps, the President of the United States said the following. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy signed an executive order establishing the Peace Corps. Remember, executive order, it wasn't done by a congressional act, it was a presidential act, establishing the Peace Corps, forever changing the way. One of President Kennedy's most enduring legacies can be found in the over 200,000 current and returned Peace Corps volunteers who have collectively given over a half a century of service to the cause of peace. On its 50th anniversary, the United States Peace Corps remains an enduring symbol for our nation's commitment to encouraging progress, creating opportunity, and fostering mutual respect and understanding throughout the world. Over the past 5 decades, Peace Corps volunteers have served in nearly 140 countries, bringing a wealth of practical assistance to those working to build better lives for themselves and their communities. From the first group of volunteers to arrive in Ghana and Tanzania in August of 1961, they have been emissaries of hope and goodwill to the far corners of the world, strengthening the ties of friendship between the people of the United States and those of other countries. Living and working alongside those they serve, volunteers help address challenging, complex global needs in education, health, HIV/AIDS, business and information technology, agriculture, environmental protection, and youth development. With each village that now has access to clean water, each young woman who has received an education, and each family empowered to prevent disease because of the service of a Peace Corps volunteer, President Kennedy's noble vision lives on. In our increasingly interconnected world, the mission of the Peace Corps is more relevant today than ever. Returned volunteers, enriched by their experiences overseas, bring a deeper understanding to other cultures and traditions back to their homes here in the United States. The lasting accomplishments of the Peace Corps continue to strengthen the partnerships with leaders and countries around the world. This year, we also mourn the loss and pay tribute to the extraordinary life of Sergeant Shriver, the founding director of the Peace Corps. The impact of his decades of public service will echo forever in countless places across the globe that have been touched by the Peace Corps. On this anniversary, we honor the men and women from across the country who have carried forward our nation's finest tradition of service, and we rededicate ourselves to fulfilling the dream and continuing the work of all those who aspire and yearn for peace. Now, therefore, I, Barack Obama, President of the United States of America, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and laws of the United States, do hereby claim March 1st, 2011 as the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps. I call upon all Americans to observe this day with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities that honor the Peace Corps and its volunteers, past and present, for their many contributions to the cause of global peace and friendship. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand this 28th day of February in the year of our Lord, 2011, and of the independence of the United States of America, 235th, Barack Obama. So in that honor, I'm very pleased that my colleague and friend from California, John Garamendi, has asked us to pay tribute to the Peace Corps on this 50th anniversary, and I yield to my good colleague who had the wisdom to set up this moment of special order.
But Sam, if there was wisdom, it was because you suggested it. Don't run off. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about your service. I think if we asked the chair if it would be possible, the speaker, if it would be possible to enter the President's proclamation into the official House record, it might actually happen. So I would request that, and we. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sam, the President's words were very touching to me, and I know they were to you because we were part of the Peace Corps, and we still are. Not so much because of our role here in Congress, but rather because once you're a Peace Corps volunteer, you never leave the service of peace. Talk to me about where you served and the work that you did as a Peace Corps volunteer.
Well, John, I went into the Peace Corps right after graduating from college in 1963. I knew I wanted to be called for that service. I'd done Air Force ROTC in college, and I'd worked overseas for a cousin who had a factory in Argentina. It was my cross-cultural experience, and I realized that once I got bitten by wanting to see other languages and other cultures, that when the Peace Corps was announced, that's what I do. And I thought when I left the Peace Corps, when I went in, I thought when I leave, I'll probably come back and be a high school biology teacher. Well, my background had been in science, and I went to do urban community development, which means we were listening to what we call the felt needs of very poor people in a very poor barrio that didn't have any water, lights. And we were taught, and it was very interesting because it's been probably one of the best teachings I've ever had in my life, is don't go down there and just tell them what you want to do based on your values, because you're going to be in a country that doesn't have infrastructure. Your main thought and idea will be about cleanliness, because you haven't lived in dirt before, and you don't have garbage pickup, and you don't have that infrastructure. Don't let your values not allow you to open your eyes and your ears and listen, look before you leap. And that was really great advice, because I think in politics you really do have to be a good listener. So we listened to the community, and what they wanted to do was first build a soccer field. Well, I thought, I played soccer, but I have no idea the dimensions of the field. I don't know how you do this. It didn't matter. It was just like, okay, they need a motivational force. And I'm there, and I said, okay, let's, how do we do this? Got some shovels, got some picks, where do you want to do it? And we did it. And what was interesting is that they had never worked together in a community project. So the teachings there were community development. How do you get together? And from there on, we went to build schools, and we put in sewers, all by hand, by the way. And we had to go downtown to get to the municipal government to get the sewer pipes and to get its bags of cement. So that petitioning of government going down, and it woke, and it was a long story, but quickly, it woke me up to thinking, I'm in another country, I can't vote here. I'm petitioning government. I won't be able to vote for or against it. We got poverty in America. The book had come out, The Other America, which showed there was a lot of poverty in the United States. Why don't I go home and petition my own government to right wrongs? And here I am in the United States Congress.
Well, before you arrived here, you spent many years in the California legislature, where I had the privilege of working with you. You started the discussion about your own Peace Corps experience by answering the call to action. President Kennedy's very famous call, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I know that for you and for myself, and even more so for my wife, Patty.
Well, you did it even more so, because you were married, you were a rock star athlete out of California, you were at the University of California, Berkeley. I mean, and be married and to take that risk of sort of walking away from what was just the ideal life to go off to Ethiopia.
Well,
must have been incredible pull.
Well, certainly the pull personally, but much more important than that was the pull that Patty exerted upon me. I had an opportunity to play professional football, but turned that down to get married and to spend a 2-year honeymoon in the far western part of Ethiopia, where there was no running water, and we literally lived in a wattle, which is a mud walled home with a corrugated tin roof and an outhouse out back. And it turned out to be the most marvelous honeymoon, and it's still going on now, some almost 46 years later. So it was a beautiful opportunity for us to serve. And then the rest of what you said is, a Peace Corps volunteer never leaves a life of service. We transform it into many, many ways. Lois Kapp talked about 4 or 3 examples from her own district of returned Peace Corps volunteers and the way they inserted themselves into their communities for service, and in one case, international food.
Would you share for me, I got here a little late, maybe you already did, but I think you did one of the most remarkable diplomatic missions ever in being asked to come back to Ethiopia with some colleagues in the Peace Corps by the president of the country to see if you could help settle the dispute with neighboring Eritrea. And as I recall, it was a band of Peace Corps volunteers that put that peace agreement together.
Well, it really speaks to the thousands of Peace Corps volunteers that worked in Ethiopia and Eritrea. In the late 90s, a war broke out between those two countries. There is here in Washington today well over 100,000 people from Ethiopia and Eritrea. They were getting riled up and choosing sides, and so those of us that served in Ethiopia, together with Chick Dombach, who is here in the gallery, set out to try to get these people to here in the Washington area to work towards peace rather than to get into an argument amongst themselves over which country was right or wrong. From there, we very quickly found ourselves invited to travel to both Ethiopia and Eritrea, where we were able to meet with the heads of state. In both cases, the team that was assembled, there were 5 of us. Myself, I was then just leaving federal government service as the Deputy Secretary of Interior. Mr. Dombach had just left the Returned Peace Corps Volunteer Association, the National Returned Peace Corps Volunteer Association, a federal appellate court judge who had served in Ethiopia, who was then on the bench in Arizona in the 7th Circuit or the 9th Circuit. Mike McCaskey, who was then the president of the Chicago Bears, and another fellow who was deeply involved in African relief issues. And we journeyed, and we sat down and met with first the president of Eritrea, and had a 3-hour conversation with him about the war and why the war was underway, what his goals were. We then traveled to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where we met first with the foreign minister of Ethiopia, who actually was a student of Mike McCaskey. And they talked about it, and there was this bond that was immediately established between them. And shortly thereafter, the foreign minister arranged a meeting with Prime Minister Meles. And again, we spent nearly 3 hours with him, asking him about the war from his perspective, what there was. And it came to the 5 of us that there was a way to find peace, that there was a path that could bridge these differences that these 2 countries had, that at that point had resulted in nearly 100,000 soldiers on both sides, both Ethiopian and Eritrean, having been killed in that war. We turned that information over to the Organization of Africa Unity, who was then working towards some sort of a settlement. And shortly thereafter, within a couple of months, the basic elements of the peace treaty were developed, and they were based upon the work that we had done. We received there was some more back and forth that took place. But our team was invited to Algeria for the signing of the ceremony of peace. So the work for peace really never ends. And I know you're doing it here in Congress.
Well, I've never, that's one thing to be a Peace Corps volunteer. It's one thing to bring 2 nations at war together living in peace because you are Peace Corps volunteers, and I think that's a great tribute. And you mentioned Chick Dombach. He was a student of mine when he was going into volunteer service in the Peace Corps in Colombia. It seems that you and I have developed a great fondness for Chick. Maybe he's more important than either of us because he's been so instrumental in your life and what happened in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and been instrumental in my life in Colombia. And I'm glad he's here tonight because he really is part of the Peace Corps legacy.
Well, there's another example of an individual who has dedicated his life to peace. He now heads up an organization that is a consortium of non-government organizations who are dedicated to searching for peace in countries around the world and trying to resolve disputes before they come to war. We would be just derelict in our duty if we didn't make a heavy-duty pitch here for people to join the Peace Corps. Everywhere I go on campuses, people, the young men and women that are graduating and older people, I think it's 7% of the volunteers today are over 50 years of age. The next election may give us an opportunity to return to the Peace Corps. Who knows what will come of that. But whatever your age is, the Peace Corps offers you an opportunity to serve. Sam?
Well, I'd also like to mention that we could use a lot more Peace Corps volunteers because of these countries that want us. They want us to come in for the first time. They want us to grow. Vietnam is interested in getting the Peace Corps. We were just in East Timor. They were there, were pulled out when things got unrest. They're now in peace. They want them back. Surabaya in Indonesia, there's I think 18 volunteers there now. They could grow that to hundreds of volunteers. Country wants it. The one thing that we have to do here in Congress is give them more money. Frankly, I want to really salute the President of the United States because in these tough fiscal times, where everything else has to be cut back, this year he's asked Congress to give Peace Corps more money than we gave them last year, and that's one of the bounce-up programs. We've gotten strong bipartisan support on this, and hopefully in this Congress, which is going to be mostly a cut, squeeze, and trim Congress, that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. As you said, what an incredible opportunity at a time when peace might be breaking out in the Middle East. They're going to need a lot of this. You're going to need a lot of community development. You're going to need people to understand. I mean, I could go on for hours of what I just saw in East Timor, where women had 3, 4, 5 babies in houses with no electricity, mud floors, before anyone got to them and said, you know, you need to go through a prenatal discussion and some postnatal treatment. And even in that poverty, what they're just trying to do is sequence the babies so they won't be born so quickly one next to each other because there's a high risk of low birth rate. And you know who's there right on the ground doing that is that's what Peace Corps does. And so the war on poverty never ends. The war or the path to peace, the process for peace, as we've seen hopefully breaking out in the Middle East, that we can get a democratic society, they're all going to need teachers. And as we need them here at home, we need them abroad. Teachers and not just traditional reading, writing, and arithmetic, but teachings of health care and HIV prevention and so on. And I know you and Patty have dedicated your lives to that work, and what a wonderful way to celebrate on this 50th anniversary.
As you were talking about the Peace Corps volunteers working with young families, our son and daughter served in Paraguay in the Peace Corps, and her work was precisely that, working with the families in her community in Paraguay. And they were also in a rural area, working on family health, on the issues of raising children, healthy children, and providing them with information about how they could better take care of their families and have a better life. Our son was involved in community development work. Our two daughters also served in the Peace Corps. And it's for the young men and women and other who are not so young, the Peace Corps offers an incredible opportunity to serve the world, serve this country, and to serve the needs of individuals in a one-on-one relationship in some 77 countries now, and hopefully with a small increase in the Peace Corps budget, which stands just at $400 million. And you gave a statistic early in your discussion that is really, I think, important. For every soldier that we send to Afghanistan, we could send 13 Americans somewhere in the world to work on the issues of poverty, the issues of education, social development, societal development, and peace. So it's 13-to-1 ratio, a great investment. Aaron Williams is the current Peace Corps director. He was a volunteer in Dominican Republic in 1967 to 1970, served 3 years.
He met his wife there, too.